Welcome to our session that we're kicking off now, Making Clinical Trials More Accessible to All. I am Dave Craig, co-founder of Gryt Health and our CEO. I'm also a two-time cancer patient, but this session is personally important to me in a way that has affected my life. And so I was a patient experience researcher for industry prior to starting Gryt Health. And it's when my father was diagnosed with advanced bladder cancer. And nobody in his clinical trial team suggested clinical trials, and we never had any experience with them. And so even though I was a two-time cancer survivor and a researcher, I found myself completely overwhelmed by this landscape. And so this topic and these individuals that you will hear from are not only providing incredibly important information, but they are doing it in a way to make sure it's accessible and addressing the disparities that exist today. And so it is for that reason that I am truly humbled to welcome you live as we get started, and also for all of the individuals that will be watching it in the future. We know what you're going through, and we hope this is helpful. So one of the things that Gryt Health does is patient experience research. And we work with teams both in the clinical setting as well as the commercial setting to bring the patient voice into work that's being done. And I can't think of a team that is more consistent and authentic in doing that than these individuals that you are going to hear from. They're going to share the work that they do, the impact that it's having, and most importantly, really why it matters so much to them individually. As we know, COVID has really highlighted the disparities and inequities that we face today. And so this topic has never been more important. And we've also perhaps never had more of an opportunity to make real change. Another reason that I'm incredibly proud is the partnership that we have with Bristol Myers Squibb, tackling issues like diversity in oncology that we do. And so this session is also part of a much larger collaboration and partnership to make real change in this area. And so we encourage you to continue checking into and looking at other resources, both on this platform and through Gryt Health and BMS afterwards. And one final note, as we get started with our session, please feel free to use the chat function at the bottom of your screen. I will be here through the whole session, watching the chat, recording any questions or comments you have, and depending on time at the end, we'll come back to talk through some of those. Also, the information being provided is informative and not meant to make any treatment decisions. That's conversations that you should have directly with your medical providers. So just keep that in mind as we get started. Okay, I have the honor of welcoming our first speaker and introducing you to her. I have collaborated with Patty in the past and respect not only her expertise, but the deep humanity and compassion that she brings to her work. Patty, it is my honor to welcome you to our audience today.
Thank you, Dave. I feel the same about you, and really have learned so much from you over the years and appreciate our partnership. And I know it's going to be sustainable and enduring for both of us. So thank you. And thanks to the broader team at Gryt Health for all the work you're doing with Bristol Myers Squibb and with others to continue to drive the sharing of information, opportunities for collaboration around health equity. So on that, today what I would do before my wonderful colleagues, Kathy and Tiffany, give you their presentations is set the broader stage for Bristol Myers Squibb and our approach to health disparities, which of course includes also diversity in clinical trials. I came to this role in May of this year after working with a grassroots group of employees within our company who were brought to leadership the need for us to really look at how we could better understand health disparities and then engage more. So for our research as well as for products that we bring to market, who are they benefiting and who haven't we yet engaged with? How can we see those populations and then really work to partner with them to ensure that they have the opportunity, working with their healthcare provider if it's appropriate for them, to access and benefit from Bristol Myers Squibb innovative medicines. So this is a global group, so I wanted to use the WHO's definition of health equity. And I think it's a really, really well stated. Pursuing health equity means striving for the highest possible standard of health for all people and giving special attention to the needs of those at greatest risk of poor health based on social conditions. So whether it's in the United States, whether it is in Europe, Latin America, Asia, low and middle income countries, this definition is really important to keep in mind, and that it's not enough just to think about what's happening in the clinic, but what's happening more broadly for patients. So in terms of some of the disparities that we see out there, and they are health disparities in terms of greater prevalence of disease, greater severity of disease, and worse rates of death in different populations, and also within healthcare. You may have access to care, patients may have access to care, but do they have access to high quality care? And that road really needs to be traveled in order to even get the opportunity to talk with a clinician about participating in a clinical trial. So healthcare disparity is something that we really look at quite a bit to see where there may be disruptions in the patient journey, and help to work with patients and healthcare providers and other supportive groups to ensure the patient journey is one that is secure for the patient and optimal for them. So just a few of the disparities selected from a global look at this. And really importantly, 70% of cancer deaths in 2018 occurred in low and middle income companies, really reflecting inequality in other domains besides health. As well. Lung and pancreatic cancer we see are on the rise in European women. In Australia, invasive melanoma appearing in older age groups that probably didn't have the benefit of sunscreen campaigns and protective public health campaigns around sun damage, etc. And then we see Japan and China. Those countries are really growing in terms of gastric cancers that they see there. In terms of hematology, BMS, as you know, is both solid tumors and hematological cancers that we work on. So there we see that in multiple myeloma, there's much higher risk for African Americans, being twice as likely to have multiple myeloma and 2.6 times more likely to die from it. So worse health outcomes too. Looking at Brazil, an incredible national health system where there over 85% of the population accesses all their care through the public health system. We see how it is a two-tier system where patients who are seeking care for multiple myeloma really commence care quite a bit longer after being diagnosed and the onset of their disease compared to the private sector. And then in this era of COVID, I think all of us, no matter what therapeutic area we're working in, are thinking about what is the implication of COVID for patients. And we've certainly seen that COVID has had a very important and negative impact on patients who are facing cancer now. Next slide, please. We've been educating ourselves and bringing a lot of education to our employees and sharing the information that we put together with partners like Gryt and our patient advocacy partners, healthcare providers. I'm in Florida at an ASCO meeting right now, and we're talking a lot about social determinants of health and the root causes of inequities. But this is just a frame that shows, BMS is aware that it's not just a matter of making medications available, that we really have to understand all the forces that drive inequity and then participate with partners to alleviate those areas that create barriers. So if we look at the bottom of the slide on the right-hand side, so these are sort of concentric circles, just starting with the individual and what contributes and what are the factors for health disparities, starting with their own biology and the epigenome. Chronic stress is really been shown to have considerable impact on inflammatory disease. There's been quite a bit of discussion about chronic stress here in Florida at Flasco as well. And then health behaviors. And this is not only healthy eating, active living, but it can also be tied up in beliefs about health in medicine. We see that now with COVID and vaccinations, that there can be some behaviors that come from belief systems that folks have and that they need more information from a trusted source. So it's also how the patients engage with their healthcare and engage with public health and population health as well. And then going up to the box above, science and medicine. BMS lives in the space of research and drug development, really focus on those diseases that don't really have great tools for fighting them and for creating better outcomes for patients. So very high unmet medical need. And then drug delivery and access. So this is really the capacity to deliver high quality care, and also making sure that access is possible, that it's affordable, that it is in range of patients. I'm talking a lot about rural patients who, even if they have very good coverage, there may not be cancer services in their area, and rural across the world is a challenge that we see. And then within the practice, for the healthcare providers, their education, their expertise in delivering high quality cancer care. And it is very demanding in a good way, new tools always coming forward, but keeping up with that and really getting expert capability with that is a challenge we know for healthcare providers. So want to support them there. And then we push outside of the patient and the care that they receive in industry and look at the social context, the social determinants of health, the kind of economic opportunity that patients have, access to healthy foods, the schools and education. And education is not just what happened in the four walls of a school. It can also be education programs about different diseases and awareness months in communities, activities that teach people how to best utilize the healthcare system as an example as well. And then affordable and safe housing, and then access to care, which, as we mentioned earlier, access plus high quality care is really important. And then you push out even further, and there are the policies and practices within different societies that confer advantage to some populations and disadvantage to other ones. And these are some examples. Racism, sexism, classism, ableism can certainly be in here too. So it's important as we approach health disparities and working with others that we are aware of all of these concepts. Next slide, please. Just want to share with you what it's looked like when BMS is taking action in terms of health equity. In August of 2020, the company announced two big areas of action for diversity, inclusion, and health equity. So in health disparities, we're accelerating disease awareness and education campaigns, also looking at our access and patient support programs, how we can bring them to the lowest income communities in the country here in the US, and we're also looking outside, how we can, through our policy partnerships, advocacy partnerships, really look to bring scale to those solutions that work. And a very important one that is now passed here in the States is the Clinical Care Act, which is providing coverage for regular care for patients when they're in a clinical trial, when they're in Medicaid programs and Medicare programs. So now that's a big barrier removed for those patients. Clinical trial diversity, and Kathy will talk a little bit more about this as well, but just a sort of a gateway goal that has many other pieces attached to it is that 25% of our studies will be located in highly diverse communities by 2022. Companies using our buying power. This is part of economic development, and we have joined many other companies in signing onto the $1 billion pledge to contract with diverse-owned businesses, African-American diverse-owned, to do $1 billion in spend by 2025. And the spend is the least of it. We have wonderful colleagues in our supplier diversity team that also do capacity building and technical assistance too. Within our company, our workforce representation goal, very focused at the executive level, which is important, I think, in terms of where power and influence reign, and also where lived experiences are at the table from a very diverse group of people. And then finally, our employee giving. Our employees are very generous in terms of nonprofits, but the company and foundation are doubling the match to those organizations that fight discrimination and disparities. And the next slide, please. This is just an example of one of those commitments. So in terms of disease awareness and education, our patient advocacy group last year made $11 million in grants to 56 organizations covering therapeutic areas, and this goes to that disease awareness and education, access to care, diverse workforce, in terms of diverse investigators, and them also having funding for their work as well. And diversity in clinical trials was another area of focus. The next slide. So talking a little bit about our work on low and middle income countries, our worldwide medical organization has the GHEP program, which is a global health equity platform, and they're really looking to transform access of our company's medicines in low and middle income countries. And you can see the mission there is all about partnerships with different entities to really drive healthcare infrastructure improvement, expanding the research footprint, increasing drug access, and providing educational resources as well. Next slide. So this is a little bit more detail on that program. We're looking to expand our access and quality care and treatment for patients in low and middle income countries. And this really requires many stakeholders coming together. We really have to be aligned with where ministries of health are in their cancer control plans and how innovative medicines sit within that. What capacity they have to deliver that is really important. Where their health system is, where patient advocacy is, where supportive services is, as well as things like the supply chain and ensuring that patients can get the medicines as they need to without any interruption in the flow of medicines that come to them as well. So you see these big areas of work that our team is doing with partners, innovating and accelerating, really tapping into BMS expertise to help to bring more access to medicine for patients, forming partnerships to co-develop evidence-based approaches that are sustainable in underserved populations. So the systems of care that exist now do not work for the underserved. So how can they be improved through demonstration projects? And once we see these better models of care, how can they be shared and stay in place? Also more in health systems strengthening, training of physicians, healthcare providers, other kinds of administrators, even standing up cancer programs can be a challenge in some low and middle income countries, and in especially clinics that are not in the big urban areas. So there's sort of not only the clinician side of things, but also the administrators of cancer programs. And then finally, supporting patients and their families and also clinicians by providing appropriate training and educational resources. And in all of this work, I think BMS's stance is one of co-creation with partners to really drive change. So the next slide, please. So these are just some of the priorities that the GHEP team has right now. Certainly with COVID, we've seen the importance and the opportunity of telehealth in resolving some health disparities, creating more connection between specialists and primary care providers, oncology specialists at major centers and those that are in communities as well. But how can we use telehealth not only for delivering patient care, but also training? Capability building, enabling sustainable and efficacious administration of our innovative medicines in low and middle income settings, and then really working to contribute to the knowledge built, providing societies and organizations with funding to support researchers in global health and in global health disparities. How can infrastructure be improved? How can digital health be optimized as well? So these are just some of the ways that Bristol Myers Squibb, through a number of our different functions, is looking to advance health equity. So with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Kathy Florick, to share her information. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Patty. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. My name's Kathy Florick, and I head up the Clinical Trial Engagement Strategy group here at Bristol Myers Squibb. My team really focuses on bringing the voice of patients, caregivers, and sites into the development and implementation of our clinical trials. I'm really excited to be here today to participate in this incredible event and to speak with you about the importance of incorporating the voice of the patient into clinical trials. I'd actually, if you can move to the next slide, please. I'd actually like to start with a quick polling question for those of you who have joined. And I'll leave that to my technical people to bring up here on the screen. So, have you done any of the following? Participated in sharing your patient journey, provided feedback or input into a clinical trial protocol design, reviewed clinical trial related patient outreach materials and or advertisements, or none of the above? Excellent. So this is very encouraging as well, as our industry partners and us actually look to incorporate patient feedback more broadly and more consistently. And let me take this opportunity to tell you a little bit about why patient participation and patient voice is so important. So next slide, please. So living with the disease, patients are really uniquely positioned to help in the drug development process. And by sharing their own diverse experiences, perspectives, needs, and priorities, we're able to learn about their disease journey and better understand their barriers to clinical trial participation. And gathering this deeper understanding of the day-to-day experiences of the life with the condition helps us to really recognize what's most meaningful to patients and how to better design our protocols to be less burdensome for patients, as well as ensuring diverse participation in our clinical trials. Patients are also able to identify the best methods in increasing clinical trial awareness, as well as how we can better support their decision-making in joining a trial. By understanding the patient's unique experiences and perceptions, it really brings us some crucial insights on designing and implementing clinical trials that take into account what really matters to patients and helps us to work to reduce the patient burden in participation. Our goal is really to include patient voice throughout the clinical trial continuum, whether it be for protocol design input, feedback on patient outreach, and support materials or participation feedback from experience in clinical trials. By obtaining and incorporating this patient feedback, it really benefits not only the patients, but the investigative sites and the trial sponsors. So it's kind of a win-win for all parties involved. Next slide, please. So I feel very fortunate and honored to have one of our patient partners join me today. Bobby, who I think you'll see on the screen, is a 53-year-old retired police officer and was diagnosed with melanoma in late 2007 when he was just 41 years old. He currently runs a family business with his brother, and Bobby has participated in our BMS patient voice work in the past by sharing his disease journey and also providing protocol design feedback. So welcome, Bobby.
Hello, everyone.
So Bobby, can you tell us how you learned about the opportunity to share your disease journey and why you chose to participate?
I was originally in a clinical trial for Bristol Myers, and after that, I was involved in some of their corporate affairs events that they had for the employees at Princeton, and then I was able to be in their patient database, volunteer database, which then allows me to be contacted every so often so that I can participate in different panels for patient input.
Great, thanks. And can you share some details about that interaction and your experience in sharing your patient journey and providing feedback into our clinical trial protocols? How did that happen? What actually did that entail?
It was very easy to do. I was contacted, given everything that we needed to do. I was all a virtual event, very easy to set up. The information was, was clear what the questions were going to be, very easy to participate into.
Were you provided materials ahead of time to prepare?
Yes, I was provided a basic discussion framework for how it was going to proceed. Everybody was very nice. We met some other patients on there as well, and it was just a very easy experience to do.
Great. Thank you, Bobby. I want to give you the opportunity to share any other final thoughts about our collaboration for those individuals online.
Well, I think it's very, very important to have patient feedback. There's a different insight from a patient side of things that clinicians may not see. And just having the better access and, opinions from patients is very valuable.
Great, and we think so as well. And I know there are many opportunities out there, as we mentioned, to not just provide input into a protocol design, but to provide your input into patient support materials, to understand really what the patient journey is and what they're going through as it varies across diseases, as well as understanding from a caregiver perspective. And we're always open to having conversations and getting that input and feedback from patients and caregivers. So again, I really want to, I'd like to take this opportunity now to go to a second polling question after you've heard, and I know it's been a brief, we're trying to kind of stay on schedule here today, but to really understand, see if there's any change in polling and see if from hearing from Bobby, as far as that experience, what your willingness is and understanding of how the patient voice supports clinical trial development execution. And would you be interested and willing to participate in patient voice activities? So if you can just select one of these, either yes, no, or if you're still unsure. And I was really encouraged and pleasantly surprised from the initial poll to see how many people have been involved. So wonderful to hear. Great. So 73%. And actually no no's, which is wonderful, and some still unsure. So I think there's still some, people that may want to find out more information about it. But I think Bobby is able to give us a brief perspective as far as it's something that is really up to the patient. It's, we encourage patients to volunteer to participate with industry in this. And it is not, it can be as time consuming as you want it to be. There are always opportunities, and for us, there's opportunities when we may reach out to patients who have volunteered to say no. I just don't have the time right now. It's not an opportune time for me. Or yes, I'd love to participate. So keep that in mind. I again want to thank Bobby and express my sincere appreciation for taking the time to join me today and to share some of the opportunities you've had to collaborate with us to help us incorporate the patient voice into our clinical trials. And we definitely look forward to continued collaboration, Bobby. I'd now like to turn it over to my colleague, Tiffany Valentine, who's going to speak to us about decentralized clinical trials. So thanks again, Bobby.
Thank you, Kathy. Hello, everyone. My name is Tiffany Valentine. My role at BMS is clinical trial innovation. I run innovation projects with a focus of improving our clinical trials. And before I get started, I want to say how happy and honored I am to be here with you today. So what drives me every day is our experience in the clinical trials. And what I'm going to share with you is one of my projects that I'm passionate about is that how do we improve access to our trials? How do we improve patient experience? And how do we improve our experience for our sites, which are our heroes during COVID and our heroes every day in bringing our clinical trials forward and helping our patients along through the process. So the purpose that I'm here is to talk about decentralized trials. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what a decentralized trial means, because that concept might be new, or you might read about it in a number of different mediums. So I want to set the stage and provide some foundation there for you. And then talk to you about a patient journey through a decentralized trial and what does that look like. And then I want to highlight a couple of benefits, how we see the use of capabilities and how it improves the experience of patients during the different stages of a trial. And then what is BMS doing with regards to decentralizing our trials and bringing those trials to patients. So let's dive in. So there's been a number of different ways of conducting clinical trials to date. Traditionally, we see trials conducted through a hospital, academic center, research center. And what we spoke about earlier is access. In order to get access to those clinical trials, not only do you need to be aware of them, but you have to have the means to get to those sites in order to participate in the trials. And over the last decade, we've seen a transition to enable some of these remote or more digital means to allow for us to participate, our patients to participate remotely from their patient's home or even through local communities. And so when we talk about decentralized trials, we talk about it in a variety of ways. We talk about having some visits at the hospital, could be some visits that are done at a patient's home. Some visits could be done at local healthcare facilities, pharmacies, local labs. We also talk about enabling virtual visits through telemedicine and collecting data virtually through online questionnaires and other digital components like wearables. And so what's really neat and exciting about where we are today with decentralized trials is that there's really no one size fits all. We're seeing a broad variety of trials that are some visits that are at the office, at the research center, some visits are at home, and then we're seeing trials that are totally virtual. And that's really exciting to see that more and more of these capabilities are included in our clinical trials. And not only that, what you see here on the side of the screen is all of the different capabilities that have been developed over the years that are now coming together to provide a holistic experience for a patient. So to allow for more digital components, to allow for one place to go for a experience, a clinical trial experience, so you can go do a telemedicine visit or go do a clinical assessment. So it's a mixture of digital components and also non-digital components such as like home health or a local lab, and combining these two phases together to provide that holistic experience for our patients. So if we want to flip to the next slide, I wanted to share with you a patient journey. So what can a decentralized trial look like? We talk about patients and accessibility. And in this case, we have a wife, a mom of two, a manager at a local bank, and imagine having time to do the visits, let alone the time to travel to participate in trials can be really challenging. And so how do we do some of these visits more remotely? So you can think about joining this decentralized trial, learning about it through your doctor. You might learn about it through online media. You might even learn about it by searching a sponsor website. And consenting with your doctor through an online digital consent form versus a paper consent form, because I know that paper not only can be very long, but with the consent form digital, you can review it at home, you could share it, you could jump to different places in the consent. We also talk about moving in the journey, completing some of the screening and enrollment visits at the research site and completing some of them locally or even through the digital medium. Maybe you have some lab kits that are done at home, or a home health nurse that comes to the patient's home. We talk about, and we're applying these different means. So in this, I just want to give you these examples. Moving into data collection, doing these clinical assessment tools through, your cell phone or your laptop that you're already using, or if you need a device, providing a device so that way a patient could participate through these devices. And then safety follow-up through telemedicine and check-ins. Maybe you have a concern in between visits, you want to check in, but you don't want to go into the site. Having the ability to chat with your investigator, message your investigator, their staff, and also doing a telemedicine visit in between visits or in replacement of a visit is really a time saver. And then last is a study drug administration. Imagine there are some drugs that right now they're only administered at the research center. Some drugs you can take orally and they're sent home with you. but imagine having the drug sent to your home or administered at your home rather than having to go into the office. And it's really about having the flexibility in the patient in that makes sense for the patient, that makes sense for the clinical trial, that allows for the flexibility to decrease the burden and to improve our patients' experience in our trials. So if you want to flip to the next slide, I want to highlight a couple of modalities that we use quite often in our clinical trials. I like to say that these are most commonly used across the industry. These have been out there for quite some time. I'll give you an example of the e-consent. I spoke about the e-consent a little bit on the last slide, where it's almost like doing an electronic contract where our contracts are quite long. Our consents are quite long, but wouldn't it be nice to be able to do an e-consent, have it more interactive, videos, graphics, links, additional resources? You don't need to review it all at one time. You can review parts and pieces, jump around in the consent, and then also share part of the consent with your doctor. And so it just really makes it more of a engaging experience rather than having a number of papers. And also the telehealth. The telehealth we've seen a lot over these last years with COVID. But how do we bring telehealth as a healthcare option to patients when they're in a clinical trial? And where can we use it where it makes the most sense? Can we use it to complement visits that are done in the office? Can we use it to replace a visit? So patient doesn't have to come into the office. Talk about having to spend time to go into the office, and making access to your healthcare providers, particularly through research, is really important. And so providing this option into our clinical trials is something that we are actively doing. And then the electronic questionnaires. We do a lot of questionnaires in clinical trials. We want to check to see how you're doing, what your experience is, how you're feeling. And doing this on paper, we've done it years through paper diaries. And even today, outside of a clinical trial, if we were to track something through a manual means, you're more likely to forget it or skip it, or maybe you might miss some items. So what's really nice about enabling an electronic questionnaire is that it provides the reminders, notifications, and alerts, and it allows you to flow through these questionnaires in bites and pieces, so it doesn't seem so overwhelming. And then the other piece that I really like about the questionnaire, so you could do it on your own time when you're doing a decentralized trial. You don't need to complete the questionnaire when you're at the office. You can complete it when it makes sense to you. So whether or not it's in the morning or at night, at a certain time of the day that you feel like it makes the most sense, it allows for that flexibility for you to provide that best time of the day to complete those questionnaires. So these are just a couple of the items that we're working on that we're including in our clinical trials. But most importantly, what I wanted to highlight for you today is that these are created for patients, for the benefit of patients. And what is really nice is that it's transforming the way that we do trials. How do we move from this traditional paper-based mode that's very, that everything is done from the sites, to how do we provide it to you as a patient, make it flexible, make it easy, make it interactive, so that way you can understand the information, digest it, and it helps you to go through the patient journey in a way that makes sense to you. So if you want to flip to the next slide. So a couple of highlights. For BMS, and including a decentralized trial, not only at BMS, but across the industry, it almost sounds like it would be easier than what it is. We we're in a time where we are really not only just adding the digital capabilities to our protocols, but it's a time where we're really questioning our protocol designs to see what really makes sense for our patients. Can we move around the patient visits so that way the patients don't have to come into the office every time? Can we group some of our assessments and procedures together? So some of them can be done at home versus on site. And so what's really important for BMS and what we've instilled is this decentralized trials at the get-go, starting at the beginning when we're talking about trial concept, the developing of the product. How can we make this easier for the patients, and really designing with our patients in mind? But we don't want to stop there, because we also want to involve our sites and the regulatory authorities, because we want to make sure that the protocols make sense for our sites, because they are ultimate heroes in making our trials happen. And so we want to bring in sites as well as patients to provide feedback on our designs, and then also help us to roll out these decentralized trials. And then finally, what we've realized in the process is that as patients become more and more decentralized in these studies, it's so important to provide this white glove service. And we talk about providing service support to our sites, but we're now providing patients with tablets and devices and user access and different apps and platforms, and now we have Wi-Fi and cellular. And so how do we provide support for patients? Because what we want to be able to do is to be able to provide our patients with the flexibility to do these assessments, to log in, to do the telehealth, to do all these different trial activities at their convenience. So providing support during 8 to 5 work days doesn't make sense, but because what we really want you to do is to be able to say, you know what, it makes sense. I work all day and I can only do these questionnaires at night. So we want patients to be able to go in at night or during the weekend or whatever time makes sense. And if there's an issue with access, to be able to access that support to help them handle those issues in real time. And that's really important. So I'm going to close by with one of my colleagues' favorite quotes. I do work in an innovation team, and what we talk about quite a bit is that innovation is a journey. It's not a destination. So when I look at our journey with decentralized trials, and knowing that decentralized trials, our first decentralized trial in the industry was well over a decade ago, and we've been adding these parts and pieces over time that add value and just make it easier. And now as we proceed to the next phase of the journey, how do we integrate and bring these capabilities together and bring a holistic view to our protocols and our sites and our patients that really make the most sense? So thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity to present. I'm here in case of questions. And actually, Dave, what I'd like to do is hand it over to you because I want to see if there's any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tiffany, and all of our speakers. May I stay right with you for a first question, Tiffany?
Sure. Of course, please.
So when I think about, as a researcher myself, when I think about the way protocols were always developed and sites were selected, historically, they were decisions that didn't include many of these things. And I kept hearing through your presentation the focus on experience. What is it like for you to be thinking about the human and their experience and the way they interact in these systems?
Oh, it's where Kathy had said, bringing in our patients. We had a session a few years back where we had our our devices or our tablets for e-diaries. I remember the time when we had our e-diaries and they were just coming out and we weren't sure what the experience would be. So what we did is we brought in a patient panel, and we had a patient panel take a look at the devices and provide feedback. And we do a similar type of exercise with our protocols, where we'll share a protocol with our patients and get feedback from our patients as far as what makes the most sense. Do the lab draws make sense? Do the capabilities make sense? And some of the capabilities are new. So it's all the more important that we do that check. We have an idea about what might make sense, but we don't want to release a new digital component or a new type of trial and not have it be well received by the patients, because we are reliant on our patients and our sites for the outcomes of our trials. So it's so important to get that patient feedback in advance. We do it at the very front, protocol design, and then when we're developing new digital capabilities, to get the patient feedback and the site feedback up front.
Yeah, well, both from a former patient perspective as well as someone going through cancer, and just knowing how overwhelmed I was, I'm so grateful to know that this work is happening now to change these things. So thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Patty, may we come back to you for a question? Would that be okay?
Sure, of course.
So all I could think about in the opening of this conversation is the scale of the stuff that we're talking about, right? And I know that the last numbers that I saw from the National Cancer Institute are that only 2% of oncologists are Black and African American, and only about 6% are Hispanic or Latino. And I know that you're doing work to change that, at the ground level, making changes. What is it like for you as someone who's facing the scale and the size of these problems to have these individual relationships and to support what they're doing to create change at the ground level?
Yeah, it can be daunting. These are big things that we're taking on, but I am a person who looks for small victories and just keep on piling them up, that every bit matters. Every new clinician trained, every patient that's been educated, every nurse navigator who has made that connection for a patient, that all of it absolutely matters. But there are now, fortunately, some big levers that I think there's agreement in the cancer community that we all need to work on together, and you've struck on one of them in terms of diversity in the workforce. And so Bristol Myers Squibb Foundation in particular has a really fantastic initiative. It's a Diversity in Clinical Trials Career Development Program, where they're training 250 investigators from underrepresented medicine, so oncology being one of them, not many, as you said, very few racially and ethnically diverse providers based on the population, and then also looking at medical school students too. So there'll be a pipeline coming into this program as well, and it's a 2-year program protecting those providers' time for half of their time. So it's a very, very deep experience, and one of the most important components is where there has always been really good training for how to stand up a clinical trial, how to work as an investigator with the team, sort of all of the training that goes around it. The piece that has been missing has been community-based participatory clinical research, really effective community outreach and engagement with the investigators, seeing even their team is bigger, as involving community scientists, community health workers as well, who can be trained on supporting a patient when they're in a clinical trial, different than when they're in regular care, for example, the importance of patient navigators and all kinds of partners. So that's sort of one of the big changes is, things that we know we have to do, but then always making sure in terms of diverse workforce across the board in cancer care, but then always thinking about who are the community partners who also need training and support, and then that connection, because we're all really one big team for patients. So how do we really start to operate more in that kind of way, and that way make a really big difference for patients as well. But then also on the company side, we just finished an RFP. We just closed it up last week, and it is specifically for community health workers and patient navigators, and that being a very diverse workforce and a broad, a broadly trained cadre as well to help patients both in what they need in the community setting, social determinants of health, linkage to care, and then those nurse navigators can really help patients, particularly in clinical trials, navigate all the pieces of that experience there as well. So really proud that the foundation's doing work, but also the company is making investments in these really important other kinds of supporters for patient care.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned all that. Having been someone who's gotten to meet the 56 grant recipients, several of them, and see the work that they're doing, oh my gosh, they're just the most inspired and individuals creating real change. And so I'm so glad you shared that. And I hope anybody that wants to learn about change can use those as examples to model it for themselves too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Patty, so much. I think we've got a few minutes left, and if it's okay, Kathy, can we come back to an area you were talking on? So by way of framing, I've been a patient insight and experience researcher for almost 20 years. And every time I go in thinking I know what we're going to learn, I'm almost always wrong, and sometimes profoundly wrong. So what is it like being in your seat where you get to actually hear in the words and the voices of the individuals? What is it like to sort of learn and hear those things, and then how they affect your work?
Sure, great question, Dave. And I agree. You hit the nail on the head. We never know. We think we know, but we don't really know. And that's why we really are dependent on our patients and caregivers to really help us understand really what they're going through, because it's different for each and every one of them. And it varies across the different oncology disease indications. So we may hear from a melanoma patient like Bobby, and the perspective from a breast cancer patient may be totally different. So we really need to take into account the different disease indications, as well as not just from a generic patient insights. Obviously, there are insights that we level as far as this would be generic and impact all patients. And then at that disease level is really critical. So in going into that, we've started to learn that we should not have any preconceived notions as far as what patients are feeling or thinking, or what may be burdensome to some and not to others. And we try to make sure that we're going in with an open mind, that we're really depending on what types of insights we want to gather from them, whether it's protocol design, whether it's in how to reach them through awareness materials, whether it's support materials throughout a clinical trial. We try to make sure that we are gearing it towards the individual patient with that individual disease. So that's very critical to us, and we continue to share those insights across our clinical stakeholders, and that's also key, so that they're translated across the different stakeholders in the organization.
Yeah, and oftentimes this is a topic that people never think about until they're forced to have to think about it. And so many times people think about, cancer research as being some type of biology, but to really understand the humans and the experience, that is just as diverse as the biology.
And we also, I saw something in the chat, Dave, too, that, we also are trying to focus more on how we can support our investigative sites and our physicians and HCPs with talking about clinical trials to patients. We know that that conversation is not always taking place. Why isn't it taking place? Where can we help to support that conversation as far as those discussions about clinical trials? So another key piece for us, for sure.
That's excellent. Well, I know that you have lots of resources. Where can we send them, Kathy? What is available on the site? Is the Study Connect a place to send people, or?
So, yeah, BMS Study Connect is at our site, which tells a little bit about clinical trials. It also lists all the clinical trials that we have available at Bristol Myers Squibb, but we're also very proud that we also are able to share clinical trials across our other industry partners if you're not able to find one within BMS Study Connect. So that's something that we're really proud of with Study Connect. Also on the, I think the slides will be shared on the Gryt Health site, but there was an 800 number on my final slide, which is our screening. Our outside screening department that will actually, if you're interested in participating in the US at this point, unfortunately, we're working on ex-US. If you're interested in participating as a patient in one way or another with Bristol Myers Squibb, you can call that number and there'll be a kind of an initial potential screening, and they'll be able to then identify where you may fit within our database, such as Bobby did.
Thank you. That's wonderful. And I see people were putting other things, ideas in the chat as well. So just love the sharing of resources and to see all that. And of course, Bobby, being a patient myself, I have to give our patient speaker the last word. What is it like to have your voice? And if I can ask you to go back to when you were first diagnosed, what is it like to sit here today with this perspective?
Well, it's a totally different perspective, and I called it a journey as I went through it. You learn so much, and just being able to work with Bristol Myers and be a patient advocate or a voice is very rewarding.
Yeah, thank you very much. Tiffany, I'll close with my final comment is that I admire how you led with, your purpose and mission and what you focus on. For me, that is knowing how much getting a diagnosis can steal our humanity and make us feel powerless. And what we're doing is really about restoring humanity, and the way you all approach this topic to make it inclusive and more human is some of the most important work in the world. So thank you all so much to Patty, Kathy, Tiffany, and Bobby for our time together, and for everybody who will get to see this session in the future. Thank you.